U.S. House passes resolution honoring Iranian protesters. Pompeo says he helped stop nuclear war between Pakistan and India. Israeli soldiers kill 9 Palestinians, injure 16 while storming a refugee camp. The displaced Rohingya living under the open sky along the Burma-Bangladesh border. 5 billion people at risk from trans fats leading to heart disease, says WHO. From Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Syed. Our top story tonight. On Wednesday, the U.S. Secret Service released a report that investigated 173 mass attacks between 2016 to 2020 in the country. It analyzed those where 3 or more people were injured or killed in businesses, schools, houses of worship, open spaces, and other locations where we live our daily lives. The report found that 73% of attacks involved firearms. For the 29% of attacks that involved firearms, the killer would have been federally disqualified from purchasing a firearm. It also noted that 38% of perpetrators had been convicted of violent crimes in the past. Most attackers had previously exhibited behavior that made friends, family, and co-workers fear for their safety. The report found that nearly half of the attacks were motivated by perceived past grievances that related to domestic, personal, or workplace issues. This document was released after Congress introduced 2 bills to ban assault rifles and regulate the minimum age to buy firearms. That was in response to a recent mass shooting in Monterey Park, California, that killed 11 people. U.S. Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Tuesday formally blocked Representatives Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell from serving on the House Intelligence Committee. He is expected to hold a floor vote to remove Representative Ilhan Omar from the chamber's Foreign Affairs panel. Democratic lawmakers slammed the move as political vengeance. They say it's disappointing but not surprising that McCarthy has capitulated to the right wing of the caucus. In a joint statement, they called the push a corrupt bargain that the Republican leader struck in his desperate and nearly failed attempt to win speakership. Omar has argued that the GOP push to strip her committee assignments is rooted in bigotry. I do not actually think that he has a reason outside of me being Muslim and thinking I should not be, Omar said to McCarthy earlier this month. Republican Representative Nancy Mace has also signaled that she would vote against removing Omar from committees. Sumayyah is with the organization Muslim Advocates. She said in a recent interview with HuffPost that by stripping Congresswoman Omar of her committees, McCarthy is silencing an effective, principled voice of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Teachers in at least one Florida county this week began removing or covering books in their classrooms. This is to avoid running afoul of a new Florida law requiring every volume to be vetted by a state-trained media specialist. Violation of this law could result in a third-degree felony charges. A third-degree felony in Florida is punishable by up to 5 years in prison, a $5,000 fine, and 5 years of probation. The vetting requirement comes under House Bill 1467, a Republican-sponsored bill signed into law last year by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. Manatee High School history teacher Don Falls called the law not only ridiculous, but a very scary attack on fundamental rights. Many Manatee County teachers erred on the side of caution and covered their entire classroom libraries. However, teachers and students found ways of resisting the new law, even as they took action to comply with it. On Monday, students at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota, returned for the spring semester, weeks after controversy erupted at the school. That was over a professor showing the portrait of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, during an art history class. A Muslim student objected and the school fired the instructor. This led to heated discussions online and offline worldwide over the issue of academic freedom, with news outlets like Fox News and the New York Times weighing in. In a number of cases, students and staff received death threats from people outside of the school. The Minnesota chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations called the incident Islamophobic and praised Hamline for condemning what the professor did. However, in a rare break with the local chapter, CARE National issued a statement saying that showing the paintings in a proper educational context was not Islamophobic. On Monday, many Muslim students at Hamline were excited to be back, but tired of the debate about academic versus religious freedom. But the school is not done with the issue just yet. On Tuesday, many of Hamline's full-time professors voted to ask University President Fainees Miller to resign, saying they no longer have faith in President Miller's ability to lead. On Wednesday, the U.S. House overwhelmingly adopted a resolution commending protesters in Iran. The concurrent resolution was approved 420 to 1. It applauds the bravery, courage, and resolve of the women and men of Iran. Only Kentucky GOP Representative Thomas Massie voted against it. Iranians have been demonstrating against their government in more than 13 cities and risking their safety. Over 500 have died and more than 1,000 injured in the protests, which broke out last September. This was following the death of a 22-year-old Iranian Kurdish woman, Mahsa Amini's, in public custody. The U.S. resolution also lists instances of persecution of women by the Iranian regime through what it calls misogynistic criminal statuses. The U.S. resolution also lists instances of the persecution of women by the Iranian regime through what it calls misogynistic criminal statutes. Former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is claiming that India and Pakistan came close to nuclear war in 2019. This was following an Indian airstrike in Pakistan. AFP reports that Pompeo said U.S. intervention helped prevent an escalation. I do not think the world properly knows just how close the India-Pakistan rivalry came over to spilling into a nuclear war in 2019. Pompeo made the statement in his memoir, Never Give an Inch, which discusses his time as former U.S. President Donald Trump's top diplomat and earlier CIA chief. In February 2019, India launched airstrikes inside Pakistani territory. This was after blaming a Kashmiri freedom group for a suicide bombing that killed 41 paramilitary soldiers in Indian-held Kashmir. Pakistan then shot down an Indian warplane, capturing the pilot. According to Pompeo, he was awakened to speak to the Indian foreign minister who told him that Pakistan was preparing for a nuclear attack in the wake of the airstrike. And India was preparing its own escalatory response, the Press Trust of India quoted him as saying. There was no immediate comment from the India's Ministry of External Affairs or Pakistan's Foreign Office on Pompeo's claims. A story on Israeli soldiers killing 9 Palestinians, injuring 16 while storming a refugee camp comes with details after the break, so stay tuned and we will be right back. Welcome back. Israeli soldiers killed at least 9 Palestinians, including an elderly woman, during a raid on the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank on Thursday. The Palestinian Health Ministry said that 9 were shot dead by Israeli forces and 16 were wounded, 4 of whom are in critical condition. Local media reports that the army entered the area with bulldozers and targeting a building that was used as a meeting place. Witnesses say the heavily armed soldiers entered the camp disguised in a commercial truck. They then opened fire on residents who were trying to block their entry. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's office called the killings a massacre from the Israeli occupation government in the shadow of international silence. In 2022, at least 220 people were killed in Israeli attacks across the occupied territories, including 48 children. Yesterday's massacre brings the death toll of Palestinians killed this year to 29. India says Twitter and YouTube have complied with the demands of its government to censor a documentary about Narendra Modi's role in the 2002 Gujarat massacres. The first episode of the BBC documentary series India, the Modi Question, says India's Prime Minister was directly responsible for the Gujarat pogroms of Muslims in 2002. That was when he was the chief minister in the western Indian state. Twitter users in India also claimed that their posts about the documentary were removed and replaced with a legal notice. The Indian government sent notices to both YouTube and Twitter to delete shared snippets or links to the documentary. YouTube spokesperson Jack Mallon declined to comment on the takedown demands from the Indian government. To learn more about the BBC documentary on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's involvement in the Gujarat pogrom, let's watch this report.
The Indian government has invoked emergency laws to ban a BBC documentary in India. It has ordered Twitter and YouTube to take down dozens of accounts airing clips of the Modi film. The government says the BBC production undermines the sovereignty and integrity of India. But why did India ban an educational documentary by the BBC? The documentary called India, the Modi Question provides evidence that Narendra Modi was directly responsible for anti-Muslim pogroms of Gujarat in 2002. The pogrom killed at least 2,000 Muslims, 100,000 Muslim-owned homes, and over 16,000 businesses were destroyed. The former UK Foreign Secretary Jack Straw says that British diplomats carried out an inquiry inside Gujarat state. It revealed the violence against Muslims was well planned. He says it has all the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing. According to the British government's report, Hindu extremist organizations were given impunity by Narendra Modi's government. The report claims that Narendra Modi ordered Gujarati police not to intervene.
Gujarat was then faced with a very difficult situation because of the history of communal violence, and that required effective policing. And that effective policing did not take place.
Narendra Modi's minister was convicted of killing innocent Muslims in 2002. Another convicted Hindu extremist also accepted on camera that Narendra Modi helped him get bail. In an old interview, Modi said he did not know how to handle the media.
Yes, one area where I was very, very weak, and that was how to handle the media.
But it seems now he's mastered the art of controlling the media. The Indian government has blocked tweets and YouTube links of the BBC's documentary in the country. This is one of the reasons that Reporters Without Borders has ranked India 150th in terms of media freedom around the world. That is worse than Somalia and Colombia.
The Swedish government has failed to prevent religion-based hate crimes against Muslims and Jews, and Muslim and Jewish women are more than likely than men to become victims of hate crimes. In 2021, Muslims bore the brunt of more than half of all hate crimes against religious groups in Sweden, according to a report published by the National Crime Prevention Council. They were followed by Jews, Christians, and other groups. The 2021 Religious Freedom Report by the U.S. State Department states that many hate crimes in Sweden were not being reported to the police. In related news, on Wednesday, Al-Azhar University in Egypt, which is the highest seat of Sunni Islamic learning, called for a boycott of Dutch and Swedish products. This was in response to the Swedish government's sanctioned desecration of the Quran, Islam's holy book, by allowing a far-right extremist to publicly burn it. Over 1,000 Rohingya refugees who fled across the border from Burma due to recent bloody clashes are living under the open sky inside Bangladesh. Since the 2017 brutal military genocide in Burma's Rakhine state, nearly 5,000 Rohingya have been living in the no man's land between the two neighboring states. Bangladesh is currently hosting more than 1.2 million Rohingya, most of whom fled the genocide. All of our houses have been completely burned to ashes, and we have taken shelter in this open field without minimal basic facilities, Muhammad Solim, father of 4 children, told Anadolu Agency. He added they were facing acute food shortage and a lack of sanitation facilities amid cold weather. They are also suffering from fever and cough in the open air, with just some tarpaulin sheets hanging above their heads. A number of international NGOs have distributed some relief items. The United Nations aid chief visited Afghanistan on Monday to engage with the Taliban. He conveyed messages on the need to reverse policies banning women from public life, said a spokesman. The president and chief executive officer of Save the Children US, Yanti Saripto, and the deputy executive director of UNICEF, Omar Abdi, were also part of the delegation. Their visit comes 1 month after the Taliban banned Afghan women from working in national and international non-governmental organizations. The recent ban put some programs on hold, sowing fears that the already dire humanitarian situation in Afghanistan will get worse. 5 billion people globally remain unprotected from harmful trans fats, the World Health Organization said in a new report on Monday. Trans fats increase the risk of heart disease and death. They are responsible for up to 500,000 premature deaths from coronary heart disease each year around the world, according to the WHO. Currently, 9 countries are at high risk. They include Australia, Azerbaijan, Egypt, Iran, Nepal, Pakistan, and South Korea. WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus said trans fats has no known benefit and huge health risks that incur huge costs for health systems. His organization said 43 countries have implemented best practice policies for tackling trans fats in food, with 2.8 billion people protected globally. Coming up after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we will be right back. Welcome back. To learn why the BBC documentary on Prime Minister Narendra Modi was banned, let's go to Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Saamiyah, and welcome everyone. We move now to a discussion of India. As many of you know, a new documentary produced by the BBC has outlined the horrific violence that occurred against Muslims in Gujarat many years ago, violence that was enabled by the current Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. To discuss what the response to this video, to this documentary has been by the Indian government, how social media companies are clamping down on its spread in India, we want to discuss this issue with our special guest, Dr. Dheepa Sundaram, who is a PhD and assistant professor of religious studies at the University of Denver. We're very happy to have her on today. Doctor, hello, how are you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. So first, Doctor, for those who have no idea, they're living under a rock, they don't know what's going on, what is this BBC documentary about? What's the main focus of the documentary? What does it reveal?
So the documentary has been released in 2 parts, and the first part has focused on the early years of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and how his rise occurred through the RSS, which is a paramilitary organization that is connected to the political party that he now heads, called the BJP. And it details his role as the chief minister at the time in 2002 during the riots in Gujarat that followed 15 Hindu pilgrims being burned in a train. So the documentary is essentially detailing all of that. And then the second part, it talks more about his second term.
The Indian government has been quite upset by this documentary. What are they so upset about? And what have they demanded of social media companies? And what have social media companies done in response?
So they're upset, and it should be noted that the documentary has been banned in India and on all Indian social media platforms. So that means that Twitter India, Facebook India, so on and so forth. And Kanchan Gupta, who is an advisor of the Information Ministry, referred to the documentary as, quote, undermining the sovereignty and integrity of India and, quote, making unsubstantiated allegations. Modi himself has called it a, quote, discredited narrative. And the big thing that you're hearing from Indian officials is that the BBC is engaging in what they're calling imperial politics and, quote, a colonial mindset. So they see this as propaganda. And that is what they have said through all of their outlets. And what they have done is pressured social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube in particular to remove all clips and full versions of the documentary within India. And they've also gone as far as to take down accounts that are sharing these clips, including those being shared by members of parliament in India.
And, Doctor, this is remarkable to many people, especially given, for example, Twitter. Elon Musk has called himself a free speech absolutist. He has also said he would honor the laws of various countries, but there's no law in India saying you can't do journalism, you can't tell the truth. These are fiats from the government. So, what's been the reaction of people in India, to best of our knowledge, to this ban on the documentaries? Is it still being seen in India, do you think, via other channels? What do you think, or do you think that Modi will successfully be able to suppress the spread of this documentary and the content in it?
So let me start with the free speech piece and the press freedom piece. So India, this is the latest salvo in a long line of press freedom restrictions that the Indian government has been enacting. And in fact, India is now ranked 150th out of 180 in press freedom. This is also in concert with the fact that India has had the largest number of internet shutdowns in the last about 8 years. Last year alone, they shut down the internet 104 times, and the nearest country to that was Myanmar at 15. And then in terms of who's viewing it, the Washington Post just covered this a day ago, but there have been watch parties that have been organized at universities and all over the country. But JNU recently organized one, and then the power was cut 30 minutes before. And then students who were trying to watch it on their phones were actually pelted with rocks by the ABVP, which is a student group associated with the BJP. But we're still seeing across the country, from Kerala to West Bengal, universities saying, and student groups at universities saying, no, we're still going to organize these watch parties. And then one last point is that we are hearing that Indians are uploading copies of the documentary outside of India to Telegram and still circulating the documentary through these sort of, more protected social media sites.
So what do you think will be the outcome of all this documentary? I mean, many people, I think, were already aware to some extent of the role that Mr. Modi played in what happened back in 2002. This provides some extra detail, additional facts on the ground. What do you think the result of all this will be? It seems like he is somewhat popular in India. He keeps getting reelected. Do you think this puts a dent in that, changes anything about the trajectory of where India is going? Or does it change anything about Western support for India's current government?
So to your first question, no, I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think this is going to impact Modi's popularity. The only thing that has in recent memory were the large number of deaths under COVID because of the mismanagement of the virus. And even that he has bounced back from. He was elected with the same, if not, I think, a larger majority in 2019 after 2014. He is incredibly popular. And I don't think this is going to impact that. But to your other question about the West, I do think that this is starting to go along with other information that has been recently released. And that is, in particular, the US CIRF report, which is the US Council on International Religious Freedom. In November 22nd, 2022, they released a report calling India's sort of discrimination against religious minorities alarming. And we're hearing these things from government agencies, but I think this documentary is going to bring this home to a lot of regular people. And I also think it's important that Western media, and I'm not talking about like smaller outlets, but Washington Post, NPR, the New York Times have all covered the censorship of this documentary, not so much the documentary itself, which is actually, I think, making the issue of what's happening in India and the growing authoritarianism in the so-called world's largest democracy coming to the fore in a way that I don't think the literacy of what's happening, has been here, and it's not been covered by the media. So there is a chance that I think Western pressure might be increasing on Modi to moderate his policies after this screening of this documentary.
Well, that's very interesting, Professor, because I think, we've seen in recent years just video footage of horrific acts of violence committed against individual Muslims in particular, but not only Muslims in India. But it doesn't really get a lot of attention in the mainstream. It's not condemned the way the violence in Myanmar or even the Chinese treatment of Uyghurs is in the media. Do you think that given Mr. Modi's commitment to this ideology of the RSS and the BJP, in the long term, do you think he might restrain or pull back or rein in some of these violent actors to avoid a repeat of what happened in 2002 in consequences for him? Or, what do you think is the future of India with him at the helm? Where is this going?
I wish I had better news about this. I don't think that he's going to moderate. I think that he sees a lot of value, as is noted in his own interview in the documentary, where he claims his only mistake during the riots was that he didn't understand the media. And I think that's actually a very telling comment, because since he was elected as prime minister, he does not do press conferences at all. And he's very careful about what kind of media interacts with him and what kind of media represents his government. And that increasing restriction on media is going to continue. And on the other side of this, I think his policies, and he ran on a platform of creating a Hindu Rashtra or Hindu rule in India, is rather popular. Unfortunately, that kind of populist Hindu nationalism has only grown in India. And I think we're looking at, hopefully not, but we're looking at a potential for a serious violent event against Muslims in the near future.
I know that's been the great fear, this issue of global Islamophobia impacting so many countries, from Myanmar to China to India, and European countries, France and Sweden and elsewhere. But I think there's been great fear about the potential for genocide. And you've even seen actors in India openly calling for some genocidal behavior against the Muslim minority there. Mr. Modi, I think, has been much more careful in his words since taking office. So what do you think the United States and other nations outside of the region can or should be doing to try to prevent this outcome from?
I think that Biden should be using his bully pulpit to pressure India as a ally, right, in the region. We have always seen India as a democracy in a region that is somewhat unstable. The Asia Pacific region in particular is at risk right now, not just from India, but from a number of other geopolitical actors, including Myanmar, China, right? And of course, we have North Korea there and a number of other countries that are in crisis. And I think that Biden has the opportunity here to pressure Modi. And I think it's important for Biden to call this out, because this isn't just violence against Muslims. It's violence against all religious minorities. There is caste violence. And more importantly, the violence against Kashmiris in Indian-occupied Kashmir has been going on for decades, and it's only gotten worse. And it is coming to a head after the internet shutdowns there and the kind of military takeover that we've seen. And we don't see, other than Kamala Harris's comments on Kashmir before she was elected, we haven't seen any real action from Biden. Rather, I think we've seen a lot of equivocation. But we have an opportunity to pressure India because they need us. And I think that's what I'd like to see. And I'd like to see that coming from the European countries as well, particularly the UK. But I'm not necessarily confident, given the conversations that took place in Parliament when Rishi Sunak sort of equivocated on the documentary when asked about it by a Labour MP, and saying, shouldn't we have known about, this? Shouldn't we be doing something? And he was like, well, I don't know if it's that bad. So I'm not so confident it will happen, but this is precisely what needs to happen, and the evidence is there.
Yeah. Well, we will see what happens, God willing. As you said, I'm not exactly holding my breath that certain world leaders will do the right thing on this, but the BBC documentary, it's very hard to ignore.
Yes.
And so, I think it gives another tool in the hands of activists who want to make sure something like that does not happen again, especially on a large scale in India. So, Professor, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to having you back in the future to discuss this further, hopefully with some positive news, God willing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you all for watching. We'll send it back to you, Saamiyah.
Thank you so much. That's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.